tomatoes and asparagus and peppers and stuff. You can freeze, dehydrate, or can. And the thing with canning is avoiding botulism. And botulism is a food poisoning. Are y'all familiar?
Heard of it.
Okay, well, what happens is it occurs on vegetables and fruit. And the ideal conditions for botulism to grow are temperatures between 40 and 120 degrees, which most of what we're going to be putting up will be in that food or in that temperature range, and low acid food. And I do have a list there on your sheets that show you which are the low acid foods and the high acid foods. And that is going to make a difference for how you're going to need to preserve it if you're canning. As long as the jars are stored at a decent temperature, you can control the botulism from growing, but you might need to use a pressure canning method instead of the water bath method. And so if you have just a normal canner, it'll have this thing on it that I normally don't use, because most of what I do, if I don't have the right pH level of the fruit that I'm using, I'll just add lemon juice or vinegar to safely can it without botulism occurring. But there's these weights here, and this attaches to this right here, and then there's a plug that you'll put in the other side so that it's completely sealed. And anything that you're canning, it'll tell you what weight that you need to have the pressure at in this book, and it'll tell you how many pounds of pressure to use for any specific fruit or vegetable that you're going to be canning.
Put them up.
Yeah, it's called Put 'em Up. There's some great recipes in there too. It does a little bit go into drying and freezing, but for the most part it's canning. And so to control botulism, it depends on the acidity, right? Kyla, your muffin's ready. And so low acid canned foods, the foods that are low acid, which are going to have a pH above 4.6, you're going to need to add some kind of acidity to it. Normally in the form of some kind of natural vitamin C, ascorbic acid, or the vinegar or lemon juice. And so, these are going to be red meat, seafood, poultry, milk, and most fresh vegetables. Cucumbers, all that good stuff is gonna. You're gonna need to add some kind of acidity to it in order to prevent botulism. Otherwise, so when you're pickling, if you're pickling something, you don't need to worry about it because the vinegar will take care of the botulism. But other foods like tomatoes, right on the borderline. And so most people, when they're canning tomatoes and don't want to pickle them, they'll use the pressure canning method as opposed to water bath method. So when you're canning, you're going to put whatever vegetables or fruits up to about the bottom of the rim, and then fill it up to where you have a quarter to half inch of headspace at the top, so you'll fill the rest up with whatever liquid that you're using as the brine until it reaches about there. And then you have to sterilize the jars first, which means that you just stick it in the boiling water for about 5 minutes to sterilize all the jars and lids. And then you'll wipe the top clean, put the lid on, and you only twist it until it starts moving on its own. So you tighten it with one hand. You don't want it to be sealed shut because air is going to have to escape in order for the top to seal. And so after you pack it, pour in warm to hot liquid. You don't want to put in cold liquid and stick it in boiling water. The glass can break. So after it's sterilized, packed, filled to a quarter to a half inch headspace at the top. Wipe the rim clean, put on the lid, twist it only until the jar starts moving, and then I'll put all your jars until the water level of the canner is about 2 inches above the top of the cans, or the jars in there. Now, always remember, after you process it, which I normally go about 5 minutes longer, everything that I'm canning than recommended. Because when I do the recommended time, normally 2 out of 12 jars don't get sealed properly. And so normally when I do an extra 5 minutes for anything, it doesn't tend to overcook whatever I'm canning, and I generally have 100% seal rate.
So how do you know when the 2 out of the 12 aren't? Does it not look sunk in?
Well, I'll explain that in just a second. So after it boils and you've processed it, remove the lid this way, away from you. Okay. Because if you the steam will burn, and it can give you second-degree burns. So always when you're removing the lid, the steam, and you can see it. And then you'll remove all of the jars. Make sure you keep them upright. Do not tilt the jars, and it's instinct to get all the water. There'll be a bunch of water on the top of the jar. It's instinct to want to, tip it over. Don't tip it over. Keep it upright and put it on some, a drying rack. And you'll leave it there for 24 hours. After 24 hours, I always check immediately, but it burns my fingers every time. If you can do this, it is not sealed.
Okay.
Feel the difference. So you can tell the difference.
Say it, start over.
Bands are kind of expensive. You can reuse the same bands over and over. Every time you can something, you have to use a new seal.
Okay.
A new lid.
Okay.
And
so those are reusable.
These are reusable.
These are not.
And you can get these in packs of 12 for like $1.50. Buying the bands and lids for a pack of 12 costs about $5. So I try, always reuse your bands, but you have to use a new lid every time. It will not seal properly if you try to reuse a lid. But if you're just storing this for your own personal use at home, you can take the bands off after it's sealed and reuse the bands again. And it will stay sealed. You just have to have the bands in order to seal it.
To process it, okay.
Right. Oh, well, everyone that has a garden or even just buys seasonally in bulk and wants to be able to preserve their harvest to enjoy it when it's out of season, there's three main ways that you can preserve your harvest: by dehydrating, canning, and freezing. But because of the acidity levels of different fruits and vegetables, there are different things that you have to do to prepare it before preserving. Some fruits and vegetables need to be blanched even before you freeze it. And when you go out to your garden and pick all your asparagus and you want to be able to enjoy that in January, it has to be blanched first before you freeze it. Same with green beans and okra, and there's some things that actually need to be blanched before you can them. And so, and I go into that on page 2. But when it comes to canning, the main thing you're going to want to watch out for is botulism. And botulism will grow when foods are not processed correctly according to their pH. So fruits and vegetables that are low acidic, which means that they have a pH of 4.6 or higher, then there has to be some medium in the jar to make it more acidic. You can use vitamin C in the form of the ascorbic acid, which you can buy at any grocery store. I use normally lemon juice or vinegar.